Hello, my name is Fernanda Navarro, and in this presentation I will be talking about Minoru Yasui and analyzing the articles titled Reflections on Executive Order 9066 and Resistance, as well as his speech to the court, a statement upon sentencing, and the fragments from the 3 letters he wrote from jail to his sister, Yuka Yasui. Before we move into the articles, I would like to provide some context and background on Minoru Yasui. Minoru Yasui was an American lawyer born on October 19, 1916 in Hood River, Oregon. He earned a law degree from the University of Oregon School of Law in 1939. He also served as a second lieutenant in the U.S. Army. He is mostly known for fighting laws that directly targeted Japanese Americans after Pearl Harbor. I believe it's also important to go over the timeline of events to gain a clearer understanding of the articles and the motivations behind Yasui's actions. On December 7, 1941, Japan attacks Pearl Harbor. In mid-December 1941, Yasui receives orders to report for active duty with the U.S. Army. This is when, despite presenting travel orders from the U.S. Army, he was denied the purchase of a train ticket. In February 1942, President Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066, which authorized the forced removal and internment of Japanese Americans from their homes, based on the premise of national security. On March 24, 1942, Proclamation No. 3 was issued. This proclamation established a curfew for all people of Japanese ethnic origin living in the West Coast, prohibiting them from being away from home after 8 p.m. On March 28, 1942, Yasui breaks this curfew with the intention of being arrested. In late April 1942, military orders are posted calling for all residents of Japanese ancestry to report for evacuation and processing. Yasui didn't report for evacuation and instead invited the military to go to his house to arrest him. On May 12, 1942, the military police goes to Yasui's house and escorts him to the North Portland Livestock Pavilion. He was then transferred to an internment camp where he waited to be sentenced. In November 1942, Yasui is sentenced to 1 year in jail and a $5,000 fine. In jail, Yasui is placed in solitary confinement for 9 months. And lastly, in May 1942, Yasui takes his case to the Supreme Court. Persuasion. Yasui used his legal and rhetorical skills to try to persuade the United States government to end the internment and to protect the rights not only of American citizens of Japanese descent, but the rights of all Americans. Persuasion seeking through arguments. One of the arguments that Yasui used to try to persuade the United States government is that their actions were both unconstitutional and unjust. In his speech statement upon sentencing, he says, "As an American citizen, it was for clarification and the preservation of those rights that I undertook this case, confident that the American judiciary will defend those rights, war or no war, in order to preserve the fundamental democratic doctrines of our nation and to perpetuate the eternal truths of America." On the letters he wrote from Yale to his sister Yuka Yasui, he says, "Evacuation of American citizens on the basis of race is just as dangerous a threat to democracy. If it be repugnant to the Constitution of the United States of America, then it is tyrannical, dictatorial, and unreasonable to impose restrictive and discriminatory measures upon basis of race. With these statements, he's trying to say that the way Japanese Americans are being treated by the government and with the internment camps, they're basically used going against the Constitution, and that those rights should be respected always, even if there is no war. Another argument that Yasui used for persuasion is that the relocation and internment in camps were based on fear of espionage or disloyalty, and they were a direct response to a racist and unjust situation where Japanese Americans were being treated as a group of potential enemies simply because of their heritage. On the article Resistance, Yasui says, the principle involved was whether the military could single out a specific group of US citizens on the basis of ancestry and require them to do something not required for other US citizens. Later on the same article, he says, both men were married to local Chinese American women, and both had 2 children. The wives endured camp with us, even though they would have been exempt. Their children would not, because they were half Japanese. The children in each case were 4 and 2. Here, Yasui is trying to prove that all Japanese Americans were seen as a potential enemy just because of their heritage. Uh, for example, I do not think that the children that were 2 and 4 years old could be planning something against the US, but they were seen as potential enemies just because of their heritage, just because they were half Japanese. On the other hand, their mothers that were married to Japanese men were not seen as a threat, and they were not forced to stay in the internment camps because they were Chinese and not Japanese. The last argument that Yasui uses for persuasion is that all Japanese Americans, as US citizens, were entitled to the same rights and responsibilities as any other American. They were equally affected by the Japanese attacks and equally willing to defend the country, and therefore they deserve the same respect and protection of their rights. In his speech to the court statement upon sentencing, he says that treacherous attacks on Pearl Harbor, the bombing of Manila, the aggressor policies of the warlords of Japan are just as reprehensible to me as to any American citizen. He also says, if America were invaded today, I and 70,000 other loyal American citizens of Japanese ancestry would be eager to lay down our lives in the streets, down the gutters, to defend our homes, our country, and our liberties. Persuasion seeking through appeals. Yasui uses emotional appeals by sharing personal and collective experiences of Japanese Americans during the internment. On the article Reflections on Executive Order 9066, he says, they started moving us into desert camps, surrounded by barbed wire fences. There were armed guards, searchlights, and machine gun nests. We wondered how long we were going to be there. What was going to happen? No one knew. We had heard rumors of forced labor camps in Germany. Were they, as others were suggesting, going to castrate men and ship them back to Japan? Later, on the article Resistance, he says, it was not until after Christmas that I was given permission to take a bath and get a haircut and shave, and that seemed like such a luxury then. Thereafter, they permitted me monthly baths and monthly hair trims. He describes the fear and uncertainty of life in the camps, and these stories evoke empathy and fear, deepening the audience's connection to the injustices faced by Japanese Americans. Another appeal that Yasui uses for persuasion is credibility. He demonstrated legal knowledge, used legal documents to defend his arguments, and he also used a respectful and professional tone. On the article Resistance, he says, I had to point out to the 14th Amendment of the Constitution of the United States to persuade that lawyer that I was a citizen of the United States on the basis of my birth certificate alone. As a lawyer, I knew that unless legal protest is made at the time of injury, the doctrine of lashes, or indeed the statute of limitations, will forever bar a remedy. On the letters from Yale to his sister Yuka, he says, I'm particularly thankful for Jefferson's democratic principles and safeguards that were included in the first 10 amendments. Yasuo establishes credibility by demonstrating his legal knowledge and applying legal concepts to defend his position. He shows a deep understanding of law and respect for democratic principles. Responsive to a situation. It is very clear that Yasui's actions are a direct response to the curfew, internment, and violation of Japanese Americans' civil rights. He refused to comply with executive orders, intentionally violated military proclamations, and made it clear he would only cooperate with authorities if forced, standing up against unjust treatment. On the article's reflection on Executive Order 9066, he says, the evacuation came out of Executive Order 9066. By God, I had to stand up and say, that's wrong. I refuse to report for evacuation. On the article Resistance, he says, at 8 p.m., after having asked my assistant to notify the FBI and the local Portland police, I started to walk the streets of Portland in deliberate violation of Military Proclamation Number 3. I had given the military my address and invited them to arrest me. I indicated I will cooperate, but I will go under coercion only. Start with contingency. Yasui believed that if he allowed his rights to be violated, the rights of all citizens could also be disrespected. On the article Reflections on Executive Order 9066, he says, the thing that struck me immediately was that the military was ordering the civilian to do something. In my opinion, that's the way dictatorships are formed. And if I, as an American citizen, stood still for this, I would be derogating the rights of all citizens. Later, on the letters he wrote from Yale to his sister Yuka, he says, I felt that as an American, I should personally do something to prevent the deterioration of the fundamental principles which made America great. It is for you too, as well as for every American, white, yellow, or black, that these principles must be recognized. I think that they will be. Yasui believed that if the US government was able to segregate the Japanese and put them in camps used based on race, this could lead to any other group or minority to go through the same situation. Unfortunately, Yasui lost his case, and his efforts did not immediately result in the end of the internment. He continued working for justice after the war. His legal challenge brought attention to the issue and highlighted the needs for civil rights protection. He died on November 12, 1986. In 1988, President Ronald Reagan signed the Civil Liberties Act of 1988, acknowledging the injustice of the internment of Japanese Americans during the war, and issued a formal apology. In November 2015, President Barack Obama honored him with the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the highest civilian award given in the U.S. As primary source, I included these two pictures. The first one is a picture of an internment camp where Japanese families were housed for 3 to 4 years. The second picture is a poster of the instructions for removal of Japanese Americans from the San Francisco area in California. With this, I conclude my presentation. Thank you.